Live from the sun-drenched cobblestones of the Eternal City, conversation crossing faith, culture, and current events. Civil discourse, civil debate, and the free exchange of ideas. This is Intersections with Bree Dail and Matt Dooley. Now your hosts, Bree and Matt.
And good morning from Rome. This is an all-new Intersections crossing faith, culture, and current events with Bree Dail and Colonel Matt Dooley. For those who have joined us for the first time here on the radio and online, I am an internationally accredited journalist, accredited to the Holy See as the Rome correspondent for the Epoch Times, and you may also find me on many other outlets, from Newsmax to National Catholic Register. I hold a BA in History from Christendom College and a master's degree in Foreign Policy and Diplomacy from the prestigious Norwich University. And I am blessed to be joined by my co-host, Colonel Matt Dooley. We were talking with Matt and his background prior to getting on to the radio, we being myself and our producer. Matt, if you could just kind of reintroduce yourself to some who are maybe jumping on to the radio or online for the first time after this nice Christmas break.
Right, Bree, I'm a former cavalry officer in the United States Army. I graduated from West Point in 1994, served for 21 and a half years. I have a Bachelor of Science from West Point, of course. It's inescapable. You have a BS, and you also have at least a minor in engineering of some dark art, whether that be systems engineering or mechanical engineering or whatever. But your major is up to you, but it's going to be a BS no matter what. The other side of me is a systems engineer, and the other side is military history. And then I have a master's in military art and science from the Commanding General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. I like to say when you go to Leavenworth, if you're there for the short stay, you're there for the Commanding General Staff College. And I spent the last part of my career working in a portion of the Army that develops new technology and new capabilities. Sometimes they're material solutions, sometimes they're organizational changes. But in the end, you're shaping the Army after next. And so I work with robotics as an outcome of that. And that's what I do in my professional life now.
Well, I just have to mention, if you're watching online right now, you might be observing Matt's just amazing sweater that he's wearing today. I don't know if it's French or it's Irish. I don't know which side of you decided to put that sweater on, but I appreciate it. It looks Irish and warm. Is it cold in Virginia Beach or wherever you are?
It can't make up its mind what it wants to do. And so, if you're going to combat the weather that's fickle, then you do what the Irish do, which is you layer. So I'm layered today, and it is an Irish sweater, and then in Ireland. So I'm advertising from the Emerald Isle this morning. A nice Christmas gift this year.
Online. Yeah. Hey, that's what we have to do when we just get off of 2 weeks of vacation. But for those of you who are doing for the first time, the way that we set up our radio show is that we break it down into 3 sections: news out of the Vatican, and connecting that to news in the politics and culture of our day, mostly in our second portion of our show, and then kind of following up with news and maybe some cool tech stuff that Matt and I have been working on, if there is any kind of story out of there, out of the tech world. And maybe even some creepy robotic stuff that Matt likes to showcase on occasion. But today I wanted to open up to just to say, coming out of Christmas, kind of coming out of the new year, things are kind of slow right now in the Vatican. Not a lot of news out of Rome. We do see today that the Vatican is breaking down the nativity scene that we discussed a few weeks ago from Peru. So they're breaking that down and packing it away. So we're starting to creep towards the end of Christmas. In the Catholic Church, we stay until Epiphany, and then some of us stay until Candlemas. So we like to do a lot of feasting in the Catholic Church. But outside of that, I'm just going to report really quickly. Over the last week, there has been a lot of news centering on individuals being banned on Twitter for, speaking out against the vaccine, or putting out supposed disinformation on the current crisis, health crisis. And I just wanted to make note that one of those individuals, Dr. Robert Malone, he's been controversial because of certain political entities, whether it's from the ideological right or ideological left, have tried to kind of pin on him disinformation or pin on him responsibility for the development of the vaccine that he may not completely own. So over the past week, there was a little bit of a back and forth between journalists and a Catholic well-known journalist and a professor. I'm not going to name names right now. I'm just going to put this out. You can go onto my social media and see it. But what's really concerning is that words do matter, and so do the facts. And when you conflate words, or you aren't very precise in your wording, that's where certain other ideologues, whether it's left or right, could actually pin on you and discredit you completely. So that seems to it was something that seemed to have occurred between this journalist and this professor over the issue of Dr. Robert Malone. So the question really was, is Dr. Robert Malone, is he the sole inventor, or is he the inventor of Mnra vaccine technology? And the answer is yes and no. According to open source, very much documented, and what you can see on my social media is I actually provided specific documents that will drill down directly to the patents, drill down directly to his responsibility in the development of the Mnra technology, as well as I got firsthand account of someone who worked with him on the development, or worked later on, a colleague later on in future development of Mnra technology. Dr. Robert Malone, he is one of many scientists who own the patent on multiple patents regarding Mnra technology. He's been a researcher and a virologist for decades. He is someone who can be considered a credible medical expert, or SME, a subject matter expert, on the topic of Mnra technology, but he is not the most credible expert. There are many, and many people disagree with him in his peer group. So it is something that is to be considered when we understand debate. If we don't have debate, Matt, and we've discussed this on several levels when it comes to social media. If we don't have debate, especially in the scientific world, what we end up having is someone who claims, like say Dr. Fauci, claims authority over a certain situation. Dr. Fauci is very well qualified, but he isn't the authority. And when he shuts down other people who dissent in his peer group with similar qualifications, then we no longer have the scientific method, nor do we have debate. So it's really important to allow people to kind of see the documentation, see for themselves, both of the individuals who are arguing back online, or really, one person put something on, someone else tried to discredit him. It's really important that words matter, so be precise. He isn't the inventor of Mnra technology, but he isn't also discredited. And that's what the professor tried to say, was that he was completely discredited and is a hack, which is absolutely not the case. And because of this, Matt, and I want to get your thoughts on this before we go to our first break, because of things that he was putting out on social media, whether I agree with it or not, that doesn't even matter, because I'm just a journalist, so I report on what's going on. But he put things out on social media, and so-called experts at Twitter decided that what he was putting out was disinformation. And because of that, he was completely banned on that. And I'm very interested. I've not heard from Twitter. I'm going to continue to follow up. Who exactly do they have on staff to advise, medically speaking, as virologists, what is disinformation and what is correct scientific debates? Matt, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. The scientific method means that we scientifically, factually question things. Do we understand a particular subject as completely as we think we do? In terms of medicine, there are differences between vaccines and therapeutics. There are differences between your initial beliefs and objective conclusions and the later objective conclusions you might reach with additional evidence. And so describing the scientific process and questioning what you've got is a part of this. That saying it's all completely settled science is not how you science. That's not how we do things. And it's not something that medical scientists, doctors who work in the medical field or in the labs practice, that any other thing that hasn't been politicized is subject to a scientific process. But you don't necessarily have to be a medical subject matter expert to question the science as well. And that's my next point, is there seemed to be this conflict between, well, these are my experts, and my experts say your experts aren't expert because, well, we disagree with you, and then shut you down.
Right.
And so now you can't have a free and open discussion. You can't compare facts because now you've politicized it. You've hijacked the ability to have a conversation, and you've shut down and steered what we understand about the subject into a cul-de-sac. And so when you're there, the danger is you better be right. When you shut down all discussion, you better be absolutely right. And they aren't absolutely right. And that's my frustration. And worse still, the people that you put in the position to be mouthpiece, whether that's Fauci or whoever, seem to be more wrong and less right, yet they get to be listened to. That's frustrating. Right. I'm just looking for answers.
Yeah, and Matt, like when it comes to medical development, we want to have many voices in discussion and a debate. What concerns me is that I'm also on Getter. I just jumped on Getter. I'm open to using every and all platform I can to be able to report, because not everybody wants to be on Twitter. Some people want to be on Getter. Other people want to be on Parlay. Like, that's perfectly fine by me. But what I'm concerned about and what I've seen in Getter is there is a very strong echo chamber, and that doesn't help debate. I'm never going to leave Twitter unless Twitter chooses to ban me, which I hope they don't, because I just report. But I don't want to leave Twitter. I don't generate any income, I don't think, from Twitter. I don't post ads. But what I do is engage people, especially people who are open to talking about things on the left. I have had many people DM me on the left asking for sourcing, and that is absolutely necessary. You have to question everything, and I've said this many times as a journalist online. Never trust, always verify. That includes me. If you have questions, ask for sourcing, because we have got to get to the point where we're critically thinking and asking the questions to get to the answers. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have this polarization. Last thoughts, Matt, before we go to break.
It's what differentiates us from the animals: opposable thumbs and the ability to critically think. I don't see a lot of reasoning going on anymore, and that scares me.
Yeah, and that when we get back to our next segment, when we discuss, we've got a lot on the news today, guys. A lot of stories coming out, whether it's political or whether it has to deal with conflict that we're starting to see. We're seeing people getting very tired talking about questioning the narrative. People are getting tired of the vaccine passports in Europe, because those are actually being required to work, and people are not able to work because they are not vaccinated until the government then decides, oh wait, you have to have the booster shot. So now we have something called a super vaccine passport here in Italy, and that's only going to be required for, I think, 4 to 6 months. So when we return, we're going to talk about questioning the narratives and some of the political points. But that will be what we'll be discussing about when we get back. This is Intersection. Stay tuned. We'll be back after this break.
quasi-Christian sects like Jehovah's Witnesses and Star Wars have in common? They all talk about a force. For these sects, the impersonal force is the Holy Spirit. They believe this because in John 14:26, the Greek word for spirit, pneuma, is neuter, as opposed to personal terms like father and son. So, how do we respond? Well, first, if we hold to this line of reasoning, we're going to have to say God himself is an impersonal force because he's referred to as spirit in John 4:24. But these sects wouldn't want to make that conclusion. Second, the verse that's used in the objection says of the Holy Spirit, he will teach you all things. Folks, impersonal forces don't teach. So, the Holy Spirit is not some impersonal force. He's a person that we can have a relationship with. I'm Carlo Broussard with a ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
We all know children have a natural innocence and a sense of wonder. Yet our world is full of distractions that can pull families in the wrong direction. But with the help of God and a church family, your children can grow in the security of faith, hope, and love. Weekly Mass provides that critical faith foundation needed in life. So if your family hasn't been to Mass in a while, we'd like to invite you home. Discover more at CatholicsComeHome.org.
And welcome back to all new Intersections Crossing Faith, Culture, and Current Events with Bree Dail and Matt Dooley. So, Matt, just wanted to give our listeners a heads up that there's breaking news out of the Vatican. The Pope has issued a statement sending this in a telegram. Yes, we still have telegrams here, by the way. Yes, sending in a telegram to Cardinal Timothy Dolan today. The following: to His Eminence Cardinal Timothy Dolan, Archbishop of New York. His Holiness Pope Francis was saddened to learn of the recent devastating fire in the Bronx, which a number of children lost their lives. In offering heartfelt condolences and assurances of his spiritual closeness to those affected by this tragedy, he entrusts the victims and their families to the merciful love of Almighty God and invokes upon all consolation and strength in the Lord. Signed, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Secretary of State for Pope Francis. So that's very kind. I think it's a devastating fire that took place in over the weekend in New York. Well, talking about politics and current events, Matt, this is what we really like to talk about the second section. For those of you who are joining us for the first time for Intersections, we try to hit news out of the Vatican in our first section, maybe cross over a little bit to our second section. But our second section of the show is really quite large, quite long, and we talk a lot about current events, cultural impact, and how that kind of mixes sometimes within the Catholic Church. So Matt, a lot of kind of crazy things in the political world over the last week. So first off, I wanted to talk about the lead up to January 6th, and then comments made by Ted Cruz on the Senate floor, which then he had to walk back like the day after on Tucker Carlson, and some of the effects. First off, were you surprised about how the media handled, the walk up to January 6th? And do you have any questions about the ongoing January 6th, investigation?
Yeah, well, I'm going to borrow a turn of phrase that I heard someone else use, and that January 6th of this year was the Super Bowl for the media. The walk up to that, this was their great opportunity to talk about the insurrection, quote unquote insurrection. And I don't want to be dismissive of people who trespass and cause damage and disrupt the functionings of our state, local, and federal government. Clearly, we want the mechanisms of our government to be functional. And we don't want folks throwing a wrench into that. And that goes for everyone. That goes for people crashing the Capitol building January 6th of last year. But it also goes for the people who were firebombing limousines and throwing trash cans and smashing windows and destroying Starbucks, and basically just raising hell on the streets on the day of Donald Trump's inauguration. When I looked to images of an insurrection, I saw a whole hell of a lot more violence in the immediate aftermath of Donald Trump's election and his inauguration, I mean, than I saw on January 6th. And again, I'm not trying to minimize the fact that folks went up and went into that building. And that kind of touches a little bit on where Ted Cruz got his foot caught in the door. There is a difference between those who are protesting and having a rally, whether or not you disagree with or agree with their views. But folks who are having a protest down the street, and folks who then, before Donald Trump's even done with his speech, run down to the other end of the block and go up the steps into the Capitol building and crash through the barriers and do what we saw there.
Yeah.
But is that a terrorist act? And the word terrorist or terrorism is what Ted Cruz used, and that's what he had to walk back on Tucker Carlson. Again, I have a different calibration in the meaning of the word insurrection, and I have a different calibration in a meaning of the word terrorism. Why? Because I've seen it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it makes me very, very irritated when people throw words around that when we talk about using permissible language. Words have meaning. And I do believe that using the word insurrection is deliberate to try to connote in the spirit of the American people that this is somehow a violent war, that this was an attempt to overthrow the government. This is an attempt to pitch over our mechanisms of civilization. And I just don't see it. If I were planning an insurrection, if I were planning to overthrow the government, I wouldn't show up and go inside the Capitol building with no weapons and put a guy wearing a buffalo helmet as my leader. I just wouldn't do that. And so it's insulting, and comically so, that people would breathlessly spend a week ramping up to the recent 1-year anniversary, then spend all day talking about it, as if they could fluff this thing up into something that people would go, you know what, yeah, that really was, and get angry and be prepared to vote all Republicans out of office in 2022. I just don't see that happening. I think it's insulting. And we talked about our earlier conversation about critical thinking. I don't think it's evidence of any critical thinking. It's very cynical. And it keeps us from having
manipulation.
Right. It's manipulative.
Manipulation.
It's manipulative. And if our goal is ultimately to lower the temperature on our discourse and have some civilized debate and figure out how we can return to functional government and functional representative little r Republican democracy, then this isn't it. This isn't the way you do that. If you want to have an unemotional debate, you don't inject a whole bunch of emotion into the environment. And
So,
I'm
Matt,
disappointed.
I'm wondering, Matt, yeah, I would say I'm disappointed too, especially, considering, there are so many people think that, like, to question someone on our side is an automatic attack of them. And I think I saw a lot of that after Tucker's interview with him, because Tucker Carlson was very critical of Cruz after he came out utilizing the word terrorism. And so, Cruz smartly decided to, instead of dance around the issue, go on Tucker, who has a huge audience, and address this issue. Now, Tucker came out swinging as a journalist. I was very impressed by this. I mean, he's a commentator, but he's also been a journalist in the past. He came out swinging, and he held nothing back when he said, "I don't believe you, Ted Cruz. You are a lawyer. I covered you since the time that you were running, you were a nominee for the Supreme Court. You understand that words have meaning. You are very careful in your wording, and you utilize this word." Now, Ted Cruz kind of spun it and said, "Well, I've always used this word when it comes to attacking police officers." I don't know about you, Matt. I don't agree that people who attack police officers are necessarily terrorists, although we do know that there are terrorists who have attacked police officers before. But this to me seems, some people think it might be just like, a storm in the tea kettle, for so to speak. But it really is important to hold people accountable to what, especially on our side, in order to, number one, represent what honestly went on. And I personally have not seen. I'm not sure. Have you seen Tucker Carlson's? I guess it was a long documentary called Patriot Purge, which has been pretty much banned on social. So I've not been able to really watch it except for a certain portion of it. Have you seen this documentary he did on the January 6th uprising and kind of the reactions after?
Yeah, just parts of it. I haven't had a chance to go through all of it. What I found is that sometimes a better use of my time is not necessarily repeating something, an argument I'm already familiar with, but to examine the arguments of my opponent. And so I'll look to what the other side says to be able to understand their perspective. And that includes folks like Vladimir Putin. I really want to understand what motivates those who stand on the other side of my other issues. But speaking of the other side, what we're really doing is we're looking to seek equal justice, equal treatment under the law. That inscription is above the entrance to the Supreme Court, and that's all we're asking for. And I'm not saying for the folks who broke into the Capitol building on January 6th last year that this is something that's acceptable. What I am saying is that for those who rioted, who destroyed things for the 6 to 7 months previous to that inauguration in innumerable American cities, where's the justice for that? Folks attacking federal buildings, going inside Capitol buildings, inside various states and holding protests and destroying things inside the state capitol in Wisconsin is something that's salient to me. Those kinds of incidents, if they're not going to be equally treated, equally examined, equally prosecuted, then we have an issue. And it just seems to me that we have right now those who hold the levers of power in Washington only going after those who happen to be on the other political side. And that's not who we are, to borrow a phrase of a recent president. That's not who we are. We're going to be fair and equal, and we demand equal treatment and equal justice under the law. Otherwise, we have a tin-horn dictator, whoever that happens to be, and we have a banana republic, and that's not who we are.
And I'm actually really quite concerned about that now, Matt, because I've recently listened to / read George Papadopoulos, if you remember him from Operation Crossfire Hurricane, or the Russian collusion story during the Trump administration. George Papadopoulos was a young expert in energy who got himself caught up with some pretty bad actors. Looks like he was kind of set up by certain bad actors to try to take down Trump. But he ended up, quote unquote, lying to the FBI. It looks like it was that he didn't recall a certain date, having discussed some things with some certain individuals. Like 6 months prior, he didn't remember specifically dates because he didn't have anything in front of him. He had when he was sitting down with the feds, he didn't have his phone or his calendar, and I certainly would be very concerned about not having that and having to be grilled by the FBI. But he was also really young, and he thought he was cooperating, but in reality, what he was doing was setting himself up for failure. But long story short, George Papadopoulos spent 12 days in prison in Chicago, after having been charged with lying to the FBI on this situation. He should, where other individuals who have been, brought before the FBI have not found themselves in that particular position where they would be jailed for something like that. So we have seen for quite some time, from Crossfire Hurricane onward, this weaponization of our legal system. And Matt, you brought this up, and another person who is a sitting member of Congress, whether you like her or not, Marjorie Taylor Greene, was also permanently banned off of Twitter, her personal account. Supposedly her congressional account is still open, but her personal account was completely banned off of Twitter for talking, also citing statistics, like government statistics on the vaccine being harmful to children, some of the results out of that. She was completely banned off of Twitter, but she has come out very hard for those who have been jailed who have been imprisoned due to their involvement in January 6th, who have not had a speedy trial, which is part of our constitutional rights. I want to say that again.
Yep.
Our right to a speedy trial, not to be like jailed without having that hearing, that trial for over a year. Our right is constitutionally, it's right there. You are constitutionally, the government is obligated to bring you forth into a speedy trial. There are people here who are charged for simply, and I'm not excusing it, but simply trespassing, who have been sitting in prison in Washington, D.C. since they were picked up by the FBI. So, Matt, talk about the weaponization of a crisis. What I'm concerned about is that this is bleeding over now to other parts of the government. That's not just the politics area, which we do see, but we're seeing it now in the justice system. And we also are seeing right now with, say, OSHA and the mandates that have come out. OSHA, non-elected bureaucrats overseeing health and wellness within different companies, now is the one that the Biden administration is using to push forth vaccine mandates. Before we go into more things about the virus, Matt, I'd like to get your last thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think going back to those who are the detainees who are currently sitting in a jail in Washington, D.C. awaiting trial, it's more than just detainment for upwards of almost a year now. It's detainment in some of the worst possible conditions. These people are treated in a way, if the reports are true, and I believe them, I have no reason not to. The conditions that they're in, isolation and solitary confinement, poor food, lack of medical care, random disconnect from the ability to have outside communications, can't see their family, can't see their attorneys. We do this with hardened criminals, with murderers. These people, as you say, are guilty of trespassing in a lot of cases. In the worst case, they might have stolen a podium. What are these people really in for? So you have a right to a speedy trial. That's constitutionally mandated. You also have a right to fair conditions if you're going to sit in the prison system. And to wait upwards of a year just to have your hearing is unconscionable. The outcome of this long term is we're going to look back on this and look at how we treated American citizens and see that they were treated differently for political reasons.
Right.
There's a reckoning here, not just to the people who are going to stand trial for what they did on January 6th, but for the people who allowed the kind of treatment you're seeing against those prisoners.
Both left
We
and
don't
right.
do this.
Both
This
left
is
and
not
right.
This is not who we are. Again, we don't have political prisons. The kinds of stuff you're seeing for the folks who are detained in DC are the kinds of things that led to Bastille Day in France in 1789.
Yeah.
With the ultimate outcome being what I don't want to see, but we may be headed there. And we have a chance to kind of head this off of the past, take a deep breath and recognize that maybe we need to take a step back, get these people a speedy trial, get their cases adjudicated and move on.
Right. And, Matt, one last thing before we go on. We're going to be talking about Kazakhstan and Russia and some of the things that we're seeing. It's very well known that our enemies seek for these type of examples to use against the United States as
to discredit us.
Discredit us, right? Because it only takes one time. Like, we go out in front of the world and, at the UN, at NATO, and we say there are certain countries that obviously partake in war crimes, obviously partake in crimes against humanity. China is a perfect example of this. China has used the January 6th political prisoners, as they've called them, and I can't really argue against that,
No.
as perfect example of the United States actually committing crimes against humanity. So I think it's something that we really have to take into consideration, whether you're left or right, about, just like as we've said before, words matter, so do actions. And so this is just another example of the political or the weaponization of our justice system when we see something like this. Matt, talking about some craziness though in the news, over the past week, we've had some really interesting things out of the news. I want Adrian, our producer, first to play a video that went viral of a woman down in Texas, a mom who reportedly placed her son into the trunk of her car after her son ended up testing positive for COVID.
It should be an extension of my home.
That's Sarah Beam, Cypher ISD, confirming the 41-year-old has been a Cypress Falls high school English teacher since 2011. The educator nowhere to be found earlier today. We were greeted at the front door by an unidentified woman. Conversation ending just after a few seconds.
Yeah, she's not home right now.
Okay. I can get a hold of her?
No, I do not. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Cypher ISD police showed up just a few moments later. KPRC, the only TV station there, as they tried to make an arrest. They, too, left empty-handed, though. Court records say the 41-year-old pulled into the Prison Stadium drive-through testing site on Monday. They go on to say a witness told police she was gathering information from drivers in line waiting to be tested when she came in contact with Beam, who, quote, confirmed that her son, who had tested positive for COVID, was in the trunk of her car. According to authorities, Beam told the witness the 13-year-old was put there to prevent her from being exposed to COVID while driving. Court records say the witness requested to see the teen. Beam unlatched the trunk, and the child was found lying down. Moments later, that witness called police. In a statement, Cypher ISD said, quote, law enforcement conducted a full investigation resulting in a warrant for her arrest. Thankfully, the child was not harmed, end quote. And the district added that Beam had been placed on administrative leave. Again, she has been charged with endangering a child, but she is, at last check, still not in custody. We'll keep you posted. Live in the city.
So, Matt, as we see here in Texas, we have a teacher of children who takes her 13-year-old son and places him in the back of her trunk of her car in order to get him tested for COVID because she wanted to quarantine him. You know, there are multiple levels that I thought about, Matt, when I saw this. First off, number one, I want to just say, like, I didn't realize that this would go so viral on my social media. It went viral because I guess I was the first person to look for, like, as a journalist, to look for, like, the local news to kind of jump on this, and they did. And so I cited them, but no one else in the national news had found out what her name is, what she did for a living. And I think it's really important for people to understand that this was an educator who has been, you know, placed in charge of children, and yet she placed her own child, like, illogically in the back trunk of her car. Imagine if she had gotten rear-ended. I mean, there's so many things. He could have lost consciousness, lack of oxygen, because a lot of the pollution out of your car goes right into the trunk of your car. So carbon dioxide, he could have, or carbon monoxide, he could have been, you know, suffocated. You know, Matt, this response, I believe, is very much due in part to the lack of critical thinking mixed with crisis manipulation from the media. And then, you know, I'm sure she also has some mental health issues to do something like this to her child. Matt, what are your thoughts when you saw that?
Well, you know, my first response is sort of a gallows humor, but then you think, you know, this is a child. This is not just anybody's child, it's her child. And so you start thinking, okay, what could have possibly gone into the decision-making calculus of an educator that said this was okay? That this was something that needed to happen. But for purposes of argument, let's say she's thinking that I need to have some separation and isolation from a person who happens to be potentially infected with COVID and myself, so I can get this person to testing. There has to have been at least a half a dozen other ideas on how to get a person to a testing site. I don't know. You go to Walgreens and get a mask. The idea that you're just going to chuck a kid in the trunk is the furthest from my mind. There's got to be something more to this. And it's just sad.
Matt, like, think about it. If she's a single mom, I'm just going to throw this out there. If she's a single mom, and I'm sure there are a lot of single moms out there right now, single parents, thinking to themselves, okay, so let's just say COVID mandates are in place, or like you have to quarantine for 2 weeks or go on administrative leave for 2 weeks at least if someone in your family has been diagnosed with COVID. Okay. Let's say she's a single mom, or, you know, if there's a single dad out there as well, this could happen. Your child is diagnosed with COVID. Number one, you're likely going to have to isolate anyways, right?
Yeah.
Number
Right.
two, like, you get COVID, what could be the worst scenario? Your mind could go to, I don't know what my child, how to take care of my child if I am near, like, needing to be hospitalized, or what would happen if I am hospitalized to my child. All of these things are compounded due to the histrionics that we see from the, the media side and what we've seen from the government. So there are elements to this. I think to myself, someone who is in a desperate situation could possibly say irrationally, oh, if I place my child outside the same place that I am, I'm not actually with them. And if they get diagnosed, then the next step is to, keep them outside to the ground. Who knows? But the next step would have been taken. But still, I mean, Matt, this to me, this was insane. It was just
it could have been insane. It could have been worse. It could have been August in Texas. That child wouldn't have made it 15 minutes. So if I'm a parent of that school system, I don't want this lady anywhere near my kids, my grandkids, my cousins, anybody. So the ultimate outcome here probably is going to be not only some emotional scar tissue on the kid, but I wouldn't be surprised if Child Protective Services takes the kid out of the home and that she loses her teaching license and is looking for something else to do. This is just all around a tragedy.
Yes, Matt. When we get back, we're going to be talking more about some news out of Washington, D.C. this week that should surprise you a little bit. And we'll maybe talk a little bit about some cultural news as well. Stay tuned. This is Intersections, Crossing Faith, Culture, and Current Events. We'll be back after the break.
Christianity rises or falls with Jesus. If Jesus is just a myth, then Christianity's false. It's that simple. So, is Jesus just a myth? The answer is no. Apart from the 4 Gospels in Paul's epistles, which skeptics unfairly reject, we have non-Christian sources that affirm Jesus existed. For example, the 1st century Jewish historian Josephus, in his work Antiquities of the Jews, names Jesus, describes him as a doer of startling deeds, and affirms his crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. Cornelius Tacitus, a Roman historian of the 1st century, in his work Annals, refers to a group of people called Christians and describes the founder of their name as, quote, Christus, who was put to death by Pontius Pilate, procurator of Judea in the reign of Tiberius, close quote. So, was Jesus a real historical person? You better believe it. I'm Carlo Broussard with a ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
Years ago, when I started acting, modeling, and singing in Mexico, my Catholic faith was not the center of my life. It took me many years to discover that success, fame, money, and all the pleasures of the world were not going to fulfill me. I got to a point in my life where I thought I had everything, but I realized something was missing. Thankfully, I began a faith journey that brought me back to God and home to the Catholic Church. You can too.
Discover more at CatholicsComeHome.com.
welcome back to Intersections, Crossing Faith, Culture, and Current Events. This is our last segment of the day. And Matt, I want to keep talking about some of the news out of Washington, D.C. First, I wanted to mention Ben Shapiro in one of his latest podcasts had a doctor and professor on discussing, what we're going to see and predictions, what we're going to see in the next year regarding this crisis right now in COVID. And it's something he actually mentions that I have been saying off air and just based off of some of the background that I have in strategic communications and assessment for about a year now. And I think that this kind of confirms that we may be seeing the brighter side, the other side. This professor, this doctor, who is very, very balanced, not an anti-vaxxer, very pro-vaccine, actually has come out and said, because of what we've seen with Omicron, he believes we're going to see the CDC making decisions based off of quarterly analysis. He doesn't believe that we're going to see a lot of changes when it comes to directions out of the leadership worldwide as well as within the United States for about a few more months. But his assessment, and my assessment was as well, that we're going to see a rapid reduction in cases by the summer. He said by June or July, we should see life as we've known it go back to normal. I think based off of what we've been seeing with the political pushing of, COVID mandates, the real pushback on these vaccine passports and whatnot, I think what we're seeing is a drawdown. I don't know how, and I think it's going to be a drawdown prior to a year before re-elections happen or midterm elections. So, Matt, I just want to throw that out there. But speaking of, so we know the Congresswoman known as AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she made a big to-do this past week, having gone down to Florida, was photographed enjoying life down there, maskless with her boyfriend. New York Post pushed that out as her constituents remain masked and having to go around New York with vaccine passports. The hypocrisy here has not been unnoticed. And unfortunately, when she was called out for things, Matt, instead of the substance, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez decided to focus on some mockery that was being done from the right, and said that people were just upset or angry at her or don't like her because they can't date her. Which, as someone who is kind of what you would consider a classical feminist, i.e., I believe in equal dignity, I look at that and say, well, you've just undermined all of your sisters there by saying that we can't talk about the substance, we've got to talk about that. That's the reason why people disagree with you. But if we can, I don't know if our producer can pull this up, but we have a video of AOC partying it down, and I won't have him play the entire thing, but she's down in Florida hugging people and partying with, I think, trans, or like, I think, what was it, what do you call them?
Drag queen?
Yeah, drag queen. Thank you so much. With drag queens down in Florida, and so we're showing this video. Go ahead. Just give hugs. Okay, we're just showing her like giving hugs at this drag queen show. And lo and behold, what do we hear this yesterday? But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has come out on her social media and says, "I've been diagnosed or I've been tested positive for COVID." Matt, thoughts before we go on to our last topic of the day?
Oh, dear Lord, thoughts. Well, I certainly got more thoughts than I think she does. In the end, no, we're not interested in dating you, Alexandria. We're interested in hearing something that isn't a testament to hypocrisy. We're interested in hearing some logic and some reason. We're interested in hearing something other than Marxist pablum. We're interested in hearing how you're representing your constituency. We're interested in hearing something that actually contributes to the advancement of this republic. That's what we want. That's what we demand. It's got nothing to do with gender. It's got nothing to do with your appearance. It's got nothing to do with your social life. We're looking for substance. All you have been so far is entertaining, but only from an absurdity standpoint to see what you're going to do next.
Right.
In the end, I'm not surprised that her answer to legitimate questioning about, the rules are for thee, never for me. Her response to that is, well, you're just mad because you can't date me. What a 16-year-old high school girl response. And as you said, it's insulting to all women who've gotten educated, who've worked hard for their position and station in life, to not be taken seriously because she refuses to be taken seriously by anyone. It's the most amazing 180-degree out experiment in cognitive dissonance that I've seen in my adult life.
Is she going to blame Florida? Is she going to blame Ron DeSantis for her COVID testing?
I don't know. I'm not a medical expert. In the end, she may just have Omicron, burns right through it here in 5 days, and she's good to go with antibodies that are natural. And then she joins the rest of the crowd that's got herd immunity. In the end, she's young. She's certainly not in any demographic that has any comorbidities, unless she chain smokes. I don't know about it. In the end, I'm looking forward to an opportunity in 2022 for a return to a more centrist view in Washington rather than the extremism we've seen from her side in the last 2 years.
Okay, Matt, so talk about extremism, because we are going to come to the end of this show, but I think this is really important and something that we're going to keep our eye on as both of us being military experts. Very somber situation that's coming out of Kazakhstan. Adrian, if you could just play I think it's probably the second tweet from my friend Jack Pozobiec, who is also prior intelligence analyst. That's probably not it. That's it. So for those of you who are not listening, what we're seeing right now, or not watching this, what we're seeing on the screen is downtown, reportedly downtown in the capital of Kazakhstan. We've been watching this now for over the past, I think, 5 days, right, Matt? Where the people have risen up against their government. And we are seeing live fire happening against their own citizens. We saw video coming out as well. Go ahead, you can take that down, Adrian. We saw video of military members surrendering to people from Kazakhstan, the citizens. I saw video posted by Jack Pozobiec of normal citizens riding horses because they have now lost gasoline. Like cars are shutting down, so people are riding horses, galloping into the city to fight against and protest against their government. And what's really concerning is this little tweet that Jack Pozobiec put up. Again, his background being an intelligence analyst. I find this very interesting. He's not the only one to report this, by the way. Mainstream media has also done this. Breaking: Kazakhstan has arrested their former head of intelligence for treason. For reference, here's a photo of him with Joe and Hunter Biden. Matt, your last thoughts as we end our show today. What should people be watching for as we continue to watch this? And do you believe the reports out saying that there is a potential lab in Kazakhstan also connected to U.S.?
I wouldn't be surprised to understand why Kazakhstan is important. It's one of the former Soviet republics, and it's one of the ones that still had a very close relationship with Vladimir Putin. And it's an absolute nightmare unraveling right underneath his nose at the time when he's trying to keep the world's attention focused on what he wants with Ukraine. Here's Kazakhstan unraveling. It's unraveling because of economic challenges, because of high fuel prices and the winter that's rising there. And an oligarch had been in charge for way too long. And so the Kazakhstan people are rising up. And the Russians are sending troops to try to do something about it. But it's kind of like Chechnya in the sense that it's beyond his control. This may be the distraction that prevents a war in Ukraine, but it's going to be a whole heck of a lot more violence before this is over, unfortunately.
That's really interesting that you point that out, because we do know that there has been a lot of push from the Biden administration to, big talk about Ukraine, bringing Ukraine into NATO, all of this kind of thing. It is not within the U.S. interest to be engaging in other, whether it's Russia or Ukraine, but the United States has, been pretty strong under this administration about, the conflict there. Matt, you just pointed out something I think people really need to, this is not conspiracy, but this has happened in the past where conflicts arise out of nowhere. One would think in maybe an already tense situation, conflicts arise in order to distract from maybe a larger conflict or a conflict that may not be as much in the U.S. interest. Your last thoughts, Matt, before we end the show today.
Yeah, I think I really wish we had a longer show so we could talk a little bit about what's going on in Ukraine. But to understand from the Russian perspective, they need buffer states because the terrain's not defensible west of the Ural Mountains. And so that's why Putin wants Ukraine. But from the perspective of the West, it's not so much that NATO is expanding and taking Eastern territory. It's that these former Soviet countries are seeking running into the arms of NATO because Putin's driving them there. It's important to understand that conflicting perspective between the two.
Well, this is going to end our show for today, but we are going to talk more about Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan, I believe, in our next show next week on Monday. So we hope to have you back. But for now, this is Intersections, Crossing Faith, Culture, and Current Events. Thank you, Matt Dooley, and I am Bree Dail, your host.